Good evening and welcome to the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting of April 10th. May I have a roll call, please?
Amanda here.
Lynn here.
Jeff here.
Michael here.
Daryl, are you here? Can you hear us?
Daryl, if you're trying to speak, you're muted. Still muted? It keeps going on and off.
Yes, I'm here.
Hello?
Yes, I'm here. Yes, I'm
Okay.
here.
We can barely hear you. Can you turn it up a little bit?
Or just speak louder, maybe?
How's that?
Much better, 100% better. Thank you. Okay, Daryl's
Okay.
here. Rise for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Has everybody read tonight's agenda? And is there any additions or
Madam
edits?
Chair, I would like to add just one thing under staff reports. Michelle asked me to read something out of the newsletter as part of the manager's update, so.
I'm just writing it so I remember.
Thank you.
Okay. So may I have an approval? A motion for an approval.
Make a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
May I have a second?
I second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody have anything? Next is the approval of the minutes. Is there anything? Nothing? May I have a motion, please?
Make a motion to approve the minutes from March 13th as presented.
May I have a second?
I second.
Motion by Jeff, second by Michael. All in favor?
Aye.
Does anybody have any declaration of conflicts of interest this evening? I do not.
I do not.
I do not.
Okay. Is there anybody in the audience? Any citizens? For public comment? Is there anybody on Zoom?
I don't think so. Nobody on Zoom.
Special presentations? Nothing? Appointment of Planning Commission Chair and Vice Chair.
Yes. Okay, so the code outlines the need for a planning commission chair, and that chair has to be able to, run meetings, presides over the different application types, DRB, variances, etc. And is just in general the head of the commission who theoretically controls the rest of the commission, behavior wise, things like that. So that is supposed to come up once a year. It's a yearly appointment. It is voted on by fellow commissioners. The vice chair is not technically something that is laid out in the code. However, if for some reason the chair cannot make a meeting, it is nice to have somebody to rely on as a backup to be able to run the meeting. So as we have historically done it, typically somebody from the commission puts forth a nomination. Y'all vote on it. If I get a majority vote, that's the person who's commission chair or vice chair. If it seems to be kind of split, then I guess somebody makes a different nomination. But it's fairly informal, how I've experienced it in the past. As I'm sure y'all are aware, y'all have done this before. So I will leave it up to y'all to, make the nominations and vote amongst yourselves.
So I nominate Lynn.
I like that, like Lynn and then Jeff as vice chair.
I
Okay.
agree. I mean, I agree with Jeff. I accept.
Okay, all in favor?
Suspense was king.
That's a formal Jeff.
So my computer, I've locked myself out, so I don't have my packet in front of me. I've read fully through it, but can I just lean on yours or?
Yeah, so does Jeff. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
I memorized mine.
Is that okay, Amanda? Do you want to?
No, I mean, I know what's in it.
I mean,
It's
if they
just-
need it,
it's
if you need it, just grab it.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got highlights in there, but it doesn't matter.
Okay, I just.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you guys for coming back.
Thank you for,
And when are they going to start searching for another number?
We have, I sent advertisements to Vale Daily today. We sent out an e-blast today. We posted to the website today. We will send out a press release to the Vale Daily likely Friday. So we are hoping to have applicants in time for the May 1st meeting at council so that council can conduct interviews again at the May 1st meeting.
did Tracy resend her? Tracy Anderson?
I have not gotten any new applications, given that we just opened applications today.
I just wondered why, because she ran and didn't make it. Why wouldn't she just be the next person in line?
That would be a council decision whether or not we went back to old applicants, and we didn't get that kind of direction. We got direction to go back out to full advertisement. But we certainly welcome any and all applicants.
Should somebody reach out to her and see if she's still interested?
I can certainly talk with Michelle about the appropriateness of that, yeah.
Seemed like she was interested, but then she didn't show up.
I think there
Well, you
was,
have that.
Did a conflict, I think,
She
right?
had a job interview, yeah.
I would think, hopefully she's still interested in, oh, we get paid so well.
Paid, unpaid.
Thanks, Rob.
the ability, I would double your pay. too.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I appreciate it.
I just want you to know that I appreciate it.
I think I was accused once of trying to line up my pockets with this job
That was your tech.
by a
Okay,
former council member.
ordinance to be determined, series 2024, amending chapter 16, article 11, Lions Head character area to create the cemetery zone district. Mr. Hunt? No, Miss Madison?
That's me. So I will keep this very short and sweet. Y'all, as I'm sure y'all remember, y'all reviewed a new maintenance and storage building a couple months ago by the cemetery. And one of the conditions of approval of that maintenance and storage shed was that the cemetery work with the town to create zoning on that lot, as there was no existing zoning with which to rely on uses, setbacks, lot coverage, etc. And so that is what is before y'all tonight, zoning for the cemetery district, the new zone district in the Lions Head character area. It lays out, just 3 or 4 allowed uses that pertain specifically to the cemetery. It lays out setbacks, building height, I think, etc. So that is what is before y'all today. We have Pedro here as representative of the cemetery. I believe they've taken this ordinance to the cemeteries board. It didn't sound like the cemeteries board had any problem with what is being proposed. We've also had our legal team review it. They didn't see any issue with it. So that is now before y'all tonight for y'all's review and hopefully approval to send to council.
Do you have anything you'd like to say?
Pedro Campos with Zarin and Associates representing the Minturn Riverview Cemetery District. I just wanted to confirm that we've had some coordination amongst with the staff and also the board regarding the allowable uses, some of the language, and that everything looks in order. And this is the conclusion, I think, of a long process over years of where the cemetery was annexed into the town and now it gets zoning. So it's actually, I think, a really positive thing because we'll have dimensional limitations for future projects that are there and conformance with the setbacks. And I think it's just good planning that this comes into this character, the Lions Head character zone. So just wanted to confirm that things are in order from the cemetery standpoint.
Daryl? Daryl? Did he leave us?
Let me look. Yeah, it looks like he left. He could have lost cell service. Who knows what happens?
Well, if he pops in there before this is.
It looked like he was out in the driveway in his camper.
Looks like it would be vague trying to figure this thing out.
Oh, he's on vacation.
Yes.
Well, so you can be on vacation in your driveway in your camper.
Out of town. Amanda,
I do not have any questions, for either the applicant or the
does Jeff have any questions?
staff.
No, not really. I know there's, not to bring up the sore subject, but I know there's been ongoing back and forth about the fence. And I don't know if there's anything in here that I didn't see anything about the fence. It's more of like a design thing than zoning, so, no.
Michael?
I think that, we went through with Tito. I have someone who's here pretty well, and I think that the cemetery did a really thorough job in presenting their packet last time, and I think this is something that we requested them to finish out. They went through the process with the council, and I'm in full support of it. I just have one question for staff. My post-its doesn't have it. It's not really red. Just on page 19, are we just sort of cleaning up that map with the light industrial with the gray area? With the gray area.
So that's actually the map that is in the code right now. The map just doesn't have any legend to it. And so I added a legend. The example zoning maps that were in the staff report are the zoning maps that are online, which should theoretically, be the same. But
They're not for that, but it's okay.
But
That's the
that,
only question.
yes, that there's technically two different maps, but I included in the ordinance the one that actually goes in the code.
And then we'll be hopefully updating those again in the next couple months.
Yes.
Lynn, I guess it's you.
I have nothing. I mean, I looked at the, what's allowed out there, and the only thing basically I see is the cemetery at this point, correct?
Cemetery, office uses, and accessory buildings and accessory uses.
For the cemetery,
Correct.
yeah, but I mean, there's nothing else. Okay,
I like to make a motion.
well, I'd like to make one.
I need public
Oh,
comments.
Public hearing.
Public hearing. Thank you. I forget that when nobody's in the audience. We'll open it to public hearing. Is there anybody on Zoom?
Let me check real quick. There is no one on Zoom.
Daryl, back.
No, Daryl's not back.
Okay. Michael, go ahead and make a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to approve Town of Minturn, Colorado ordinance number TBD series 2024. An ordinance of the Town of Minturn, Colorado, amending chapter 16 of the Minturn Municipal Code to create the cemetery zone district and associated use and development standards within the Lions Head character area.
So,
Motion by Michael, second by Jeff. May I have a roll call vote, please?
Amanda, I.
Lynn, I.
Jeff, I.
Michael, I.
You're gonna start digging?
Soon, well, probably later this summer.
Oh, later this summer.
We're
Okay.
making plans and getting things lined up. We have still to go to town council first.
Well, that's true. This has got to
So-
go another.
But we're making
Two
headway,
readings.
so appreciate it. This is important.
Thank you.
Hopefully the project will be done this year. That's,
Thanks, Peter.
yeah, thank you very
At
much.
least before next summer, so you can store everything. I mean, next winter, so you can store everything.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Have a good
Thank
day.
you.
Pedro?
Next. Now we're gonna have to dig a share on things. There you are, you done. Next, discussion items and direction items. Minturn forward, land use and subdivision code update. Is Matt with us tonight? Are you?
Matt is with us tonight. Matt, you out there?
I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Matt, before you get started, I just wanted to give a brief update. As the Planning Commission knows, we conducted open houses and a survey in the month of March. Thank you for those of you who were able to attend one or more of the open houses. That was really appreciated. I thought we had decent turnout. We certainly had a pretty good response to the survey. We get over 100, almost 100. And we are working to plow through all of the input that from the survey and from the open houses. So hopefully our goal is to present that at the next meeting in a digestible, understandable form. Madison has plowed through all the written comments, and I think I created some spreadsheets for the survey data and stuff like that. So between Matt and Madison and I were assembling, compiling, and trying to analyze the responses that we got. So
And that's, you got paper ballots I brought. Okay. And
Yeah.
there's 6.
good job to the community. Thanks for everybody that participated. Yeah, I think I've said this before. That's not the last opportunity for input. I think that was the first opportunity for input. So in the meantime, Matt has been hard at work, and he and I have had several conversations about the other sections of the code that we can already start working on. That's what tonight is about, is looking at things in Article 21, which has a lot to do with process and which application types require what kind of submittal requirements and what kind of process. Also taking aim at the subdivision requirements in the town. So with that, unless you have any questions for me about the open houses or the survey, let's get Matt going. And I think we want to breeze through this pretty quickly. Certainly open it up for any questions or comments and discussion. But Matt, you want to start taking us through your memo and what we should be focusing on tonight?
Sure. Are we ready to jump into that? Were there any questions or comments about the open houses? I'll take-
I think it was interesting because there were 1 or 2 things questions that were asked that we didn't actually have answers on. I remember there was one from Carrie about Malloy Park area behind Steammaster there, and we got that cleared up. Thank you, Madison. Because that was something that we didn't actually, she asked who owned it and we didn't know. So that was a good one. And that is the Forest Service, just so you know. I think I was glad she was here because she was from Malloy Park, and things going on there. Gave them an opportunity to see a little bit about how they felt. And it was, I think the one that was least attended was the first one, wasn't it? Yes. Yeah, and the other 2 were pretty good.
It was 10 the first night, 17 the second, and 9 the 12.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so you're right.
12. And of course, some of those, if you count us who were repeats, that changes, but I still think it brought people in. And they were people who were willing to share, which is important. Not everybody does that. Sometimes they just walk around and look, but they were all willing to share. So that was good. Okay, Matt, go for it.
All right. Just to give everybody a little context, Scott, Madison, and myself have had a couple of discussions internally to keep the ball rolling on the code update while kind of in conjunction with the community engagement work that we've been doing. And what we wanted to start with for the code update was looking at changes to the types of zoning applications that the town has, and as well as the review processes that are associated with the different application types. And then we also looked at the different types of subdivisions and review processes associated with those, and went through those and talked about opportunities to clean up some of the language regarding those different types of applications, and also identified some opportunities where we could maybe consolidate some of the different application types, and also opportunities to potentially streamline some of the review processes. So I'm going to go ahead and just jump into the recommended changes, and I'll pause after each one to see if there's any questions or comments. The first one is zoning variances. And right now, as you may be aware, zoning variances, it's a 2-step process where, I guess technically 3, where At first, an application submitted to staff reviews that. Then it goes to the planning commission for review and recommendation. And then the final decision on a zoning variance goes to town council for review and decision. So what we're recommending is that zoning variances become a one-step process. And so that would mean that zoning variance would either go to the planning commission for review and decision or straight to town council for review and decision. And ultimately, we need to have a discussion with the town attorney and clarify whether the planning commission or town council is designated as the Board of Adjustments for the town. And the reason that's important is typically the Board of Adjustments is given the authority to make decisions on zoning variances. So I think that's something that's important to clarify. The town council is designated as the zoning board of appeals. I guess to me, I'm not sure if that means that they're also the Board of Adjustments, or if Board of Appeals means that's who you go to if you don't like a decision that was made on your application. And so kind of some of the justification for that is, I mean, from my experience working in other communities, Minturn's the only place I've seen where variances go through a two-step process. Every other community I've worked in, it either goes straight to planning commission or town council. And in regards to, if it's appropriate and we do end up with a one-step process, it might be ideal for the planning commission to make decisions on zoning variances. And the reason, kind of the thinking behind that is, my understanding is variance requests are commonly made in conjunction with design review applications. And then there's also less political pressure, given that the planning commission, you all are appointed officials rather than elected officials. So that's could be, if we end up going with the planning commission being the deciding body, that might be some of the rationale to consider. So I will pause there. Scott or Madison, if you have anything to add.
I do not. I think that was a good summary of that particular recommendation. So thanks.
Matt, we have a couple hands raised.
Yep.
Michael?
I probably have a two-part question. Could you give me an example of what a zoning variance is?
Yeah. So, go ahead, Scott.
I'm just gonna give setbacks. Typically variances are permitted for things like lot coverage or setbacks or building height. They're usually based on a hardship, some peculiar situation that is unlike someone's neighbor's property or other properties in the neighborhood.
So it's a variance. That's a key term, zoning variance.
Yeah.
But yes, I understand what you're saying. So yes, and in regards to what you were saying, Matt, I think currently the variances come to planning, and then a lot of stuff that comes to planning, and then it gives people an option to dispute if they don't like planning's decision and override us and go to council for the appeal. And I personally like that current process. But that's all I have to say on that.
Just as a distinction, I think you're absolutely correct. This is one where in the code, it's not a planning commission decision, and then if someone doesn't like it, it goes to council. This is set up so it goes to planning commission first, and then council is the ultimate decision maker.
I would like to continue to comment on it.
You're going to comment further?
No, I
You
mean,
want to continue the way Scott said.
He likes the way it's currently
But
set.
He likes the fact that the
me-
planning commission
yeah.
sees it
Yes.
with the review, with the design.
And I think that's where it needs to be, because we're the ones who go through the entire process to know how that affects everything.
But
We
no,
have to be given the authority to
do.
be the
Yeah.
final decision. We don't have that.
would there still be a appellate process? So if either party disagreed with the planning commission's
Mhm.
decision, there would still be the appellate process that would then go to council.
I think that's
Continue to
really
be-
critical.
uh,
So,
And that makes sense. It streamlines it and it still gives council the ultimate authority to appeal it if they don't like it.
Either they don't like it or if the person applying for it doesn't,
Right.
correct?
Yeah, I understand.
Yes. If we denied the variance, they would still be able to appeal to the council.
I guess one of my questions is, do we currently have a board of adjustments?
it's technically supposed to be the council, but the 2 times that I've attempted to get them to take their council hats off in the middle of the meeting and become the ZBA, Mike was like, we don't need to do that. I'm like, okay. So they just took action as the town council
Okay,
on the variant.
because that was one thing that I questioned. It was something else we had once like that. I'm like, do we even have that? Okay. Everybody else, anybody else? Go on, Matt, please, and
Okay,
thank you.
So just so I have
Hold
clear
on.
direction on that, so the preference from this commission is that the commission would actually function as the ZBA with or without a design review board application, and then if someone didn't like it, it could still be appealed to council.
Correct.
Good decision making. Thank you.
You said it a lot better than we did.
No, I hear you. I got you loud and clear.
Go ahead, Matt.
all right. So next, environmental impact reports is something that's sometimes required in association with certain types of applications. And the, I guess, first recommendation we had was environmental impact reports, kind of those are somewhat buried in chapter 16. So we're gonna look to find out an opportunity easier to find those requirements. And then what we also want to do is ensure that there's a checklist that says if you're proposing a certain type of development, go through this checklist. And if you answer enough or you check enough boxes, then you'll be required as the applicant to submit certain types of impact reports, say drainage reports or wildlife impact reports. And I don't know, exactly what the different types of impact reports are that would be required, but there would be a checklist. So it's very clear. You go through that checklist as an applicant and say, okay, yep, I need to do these types of reports based on the development I'm proposing. And then what we're recommending is that that determination as to whether the ultimate determination as to whether or not environmental impact reports are required, make that a sort of dealt with at the administrative level. Right now, the code's structured in such a way that that's a planning commission decision, which is a little awkward because it requires somebody to submit an application and then get to the planning commission level before that decision is made. So it makes, from our perspective, makes more sense for before you submit an application for staff to work with the applicant and say, okay, you submitted this checklist and I see you're going to have, certain sorts of impacts associated with your development. So you need to submit an environmental impact report for these different aspects of your project. That's all I have for that. Any questions, comments?
Just that, are you?
No, you can go first, Jack.
I was just gonna say that as long as the checklist or the threshold is clear and it's not gray, right? So as long as there's no wishy-washiness as far as like you said, there'll be a list, and if you check off X number of boxes, then you have to submit the report. As long as there's not a lot of gray areas of like, well, doesn't quite fit the bill or it does, as long as we can be as smart as possible to make sure that that list is really black and white. That would be my recommendation.
Right, okay.
So I just wanted to ask a clarification. This is administratively to require the impact report, not whether the impact report met the spirit of like, or what was needed or the content of the impact report, that would still be reviewed by the planning commission. And I'm thinking back to when we were looking at the North PUD, where we had specific questions about the environmental report, impact report. So if you could just clarify, it's just the requirement that the report is created, not necessarily the
Well,
content or the adequacy of the report.
The way it's worded, man, it says weather, so I think your clarification
Okay.
is a good question.
You are correct.
Okay.
The recommendation is that the decision to require an EIR would rest with the staff. That does not mean that you wouldn't get a chance to see it and still consider that as part of the findings for a file.
Next, what happens if it gets in front of commission, and not just this commission, but future people? And they raise their hand and say, hey, why isn't there one here? Could they put in as a condition of approval that an ERI or is now required? Or does this then take away the commission's right to require one in the future? Or like to put it as a condition
Right.
for approval?
It's a great question. I think Matt and I should probably confer with Mike Sawyer, the town attorney.
Okay.
My sense is that if it's an administrative decision and the applicant relies on that, they submit their application, they're entitled to public hearings, and you get into a public hearing and the commission says, well, we want an EIR. I don't know how that would work.
That's exactly what I'm asking.
Getting sued.
So if it is like the town could get sued, then I would think we would want to be the planning commission.
Okay.
That would be my own opinion, but that's just mine.
It's a good one. And if we do get one, we will get copies of it in our packets, correct? Okay, Michael? Jeff, anything else?
No, I'm kind of. I feel, understand Scott's. Reluctance with that or whatever, just because. If it got to that point and an applicant relied on the staff's determination that didn't need one. And then all of a sudden it's in a public hearing and the applicant's being told that a condition of approval is getting it. That could delay a project by months. And it could blow a whole building season.
I understand what Jeff's saying too, and I also as well agree with Amanda and Lynn, and I also understand what Scott's saying. I guess technically, I mean, there has to be some spectrum or a different word. Threshold is a great word. Thanks, Jeff. Some threshold, that requires an environmental report, not just doing a remodel of my house. Probably doesn't require an environmental report,
Like,
I've
building
built-
your
I've-
retaining wall, like, does that require, like, that's you and I are on the same page, like, you're building your retaining wall and it's next to the river.
Well, then you have neighbors.
Does that require an environmental report?
Then yeah. So it's definitely, that's a tricky one, Scott, and I would, talk with Mike. Maybe more about that, and maybe
Yeah.
let us know more about that. One more.
Well, this is not just environmental reports, this is physical impact studies and drainage reports and.
No,
There's
this
a
is
number.
just the EIR.
Yeah.
So it's not all impact reports, just EIR.
I thought he originally was talking about physical impact.
Not in this particular case.
And the only reason I hem and haw is because this town is very, very interested in its environmental impacts. And, I mean, if it was a remodel, I could maybe see it, but if it's a project that goes from digging a hole in the ground through finish, I think we should have an environmental impact report.
I mean, now you're opening a whole can of worms of like, where do you draw the line?
Correct, it's what Scott's saying, is trying to figure out what it would, where,
Yeah, I guess the trick, like up at Malloy Park, we probably want an environmental report, right?
And normally you don't get EIRs unless it's a big project.
Yeah.
No,
And
you
that's-
don't get them on single family homes, typically.
What do you recommend, Scott
Well,
or Matt?
I wouldn't say I'm torn. I think it is peculiar that the planning commission is in a position to require this or not. But, you know, so what I was gonna say is the section of the code 16-2020 preliminary environmental assessment. It has a list of thresholds essentially of criteria. By altering an ecological unit or landform such as a ridge line, saddle, draw, ravine. The next one is by directly or indirectly affecting wildlife habitat. So there's a list of things that if there's enough, yes, my project will impact or will affect these things. That's sort of the threshold, right? Doesn't say you have to have 5 out of 10 or, you know,
So
so
we're
it's.
gonna figure that out, sort of based off.
It's discretionary, but I guess the thought is that, you know, your professional planning staff, your engineer, your town attorney should be able to make those determinations. But I hear what you're saying. If the planning commission normally would be interested in those things and be in a position to review them as part of the large development application, you know, what part do you have in determining if that's needed or not? I get that too.
And mine isn't about, it's whether one is excluded and then there's public comment or XYZ. And so we go and try to make it a condition that they have to go back.
Yeah,
That's where I see, because it feels like a lot of times when we do have that type of public comment, then we want more information. And so that's why I was asking, like, what does that do if we want more information and it was originally administratively excluded? And then we have somebody stand up and be like, oh, I would see a fledging eagle on the property every day. Then what do we do? You know, like, that's what I'm asking is like, how do we protect the town also?
And it's definitely tricky on a big thing, like Amanda's saying, big thing if you have people in the audience asking us like, well, why didn't you require that? And we're like, well, we didn't have any say. Like, I don't know.
well, that's the perfect opportunity to throw your staff under the bus. I'm just kidding. But
Smile, Nelson.
you know, I've seen different codes handle this differently. You know, some it's just a requirement unless it's waived. And the applicant has to formally ask for a waiver from this and justify why it's not required.
I like that.
Matt, what are your experiences or thoughts on this?
So my experience with this was when I worked for the town of Eagle, we had a similar approach where there was a checklist that said, will your project impact, I mean, I can't regurgitate it off of my head, but for example, wildlife habitat or critical wildlife habitat. It was somewhat specific. I mean, there was enough information where an applicant could say, okay, yes, you know, I'm in a critical wildlife habitat area, check. I might be impacting wetlands, check. And then we at the town, at the staff level would look at that checklist to kind of vet it. Because, you know, some applicants may say, oh, no, I'm not impacting anything to do with the environment. And we turn around and say, well, your project's right along the river and there's wetlands there. So, you know, you need to take another look at this checklist. But so we would vet it that way and then give direction to the applicant. Okay, here's the information that you need to include with your application. And that's why I think it is important for this to be at the staff level, because if you've submitted an application and then it goes to the planning commission and the planning commission turns around and says, well, you need to submit these different reports, it becomes kind of awkward for the applicant to have to go back and resubmit things that in my opinion really needs to be dealt with at the staff level. I do think if a project gets to the planning commission and there's missing information, my experience has been it's okay for the planning commission to request additional information from an applicant if there's a justification for that, to inform the planning commission's review. That's been my experience. But again, I think this initial step of going through the checklist with somebody who's doing a project and sort of vetting their response to that checklist. I think it's important for that to be at the staff level because I think that needs to happen before somebody submits an application, so they have a better sense of what they need to do when preparing their application.
Well, to Amanda's point, you were asking about like content, right, of the report, and it's like, you could have on one hand, you could have a big, thick document prepared by engineers and smart consultants, right? Or you could have a letter, an opinion letter from Devin Duval,
Yeah, but it's.
from Wildlife, just going, I've looked at your project. It's not gonna hurt the eagles that live on your tree, and I'm good with it. Or, so it's a big difference between Parks and Wildlife, their opinion, or
Yeah.
a real consultant putting a real report together.
And I think like Matt and Scott have, like, they don't, I'm not so concerned like when it's included, because I think then it opens us a little bit more, like, we have a little bit more
Control.
room to ask additional questions.
Yeah.
It's when it's excluded. And we see that gap that I'm mostly concerned about for the town. But if
It's gotta
if
be
Matt
level.
thinks like, maybe, I mean, I would on this ask Mike, I would want Mike's just stamp, like, yeah.
Yeah, I think that if Mike feels comfortable with whatever the checklist is. He's our attorney.
Yeah, I mean, in the interest of smooth process and expeditious process, I'm all for, we have to have a certain level of trust in the staff that they're gonna make the right decisions. And I have that, so, I think barring some absolute just, gap of, we missed it, which I wouldn't expect to be regular occurrence, like, I think that most of the time they're gonna make the right choice and say, this really needs to have somebody look at it, or this is okay. That's my opinion.
Are we asking Mike still?
I'm sure these guys will, but I think
Verifying this one that he doesn't have any concern.
yeah.
And tell him the situation that we presented to you.
Like I said, we don't really have that many opportunities for that many big projects coming in anytime soon, so, the school district obviously is a big one, but.
Sure, they'll have what?
And, yeah, and, battle Tim McGuire's stuff, eventually, there's gonna be phases of that might have some serious impacts.
I think it is kind of safe to assume that with most larger projects,
Yeah.
we're gonna require it
Right.
anyways.
Yeah.
And the applicants and their professional planning staff or whoever they're working with know that that's just kind of what you do.
Right.
Some are more geared towards analysis of wildlife habitats and stuff like that. But it just depends on the project, so.
Well, I think like Amanda said, the small, single family lots. Are small projects in town that could sneak by would be ones that are on the river. Those are the ones where an excavator could
Excavator could be asked
could
too.
excavate something that causes a problem into the river, that could be a. With fish habitat.
Right. Wall of mud.
Okay, we're done with that one?
Yes.
Yes,
Anybody?
we are.
Matt, next,
Kill me.
please.
All right,
Thanks,
Um,
Matt.
you bet. Next is conditional and limited review uses. So in the code right now, there might be some reference to special use or special review use or special use permit. And what we're recommending is get rid of any reference to special use and just call anything that goes through the conditional use process or in some places it's called the special use process. They're the same thing. Just make sure there's consistency in the term we're using for that review process. For limited review uses, and the way the code's structured right now, limited review uses are uses that have additional standards, or they're oftentimes called supplemental standards that apply. So through this code update process, what we're recommending is taking all the different use tables, which are those tables that say what's allowed either by right, by conditional use, or limited review use for different zone districts, and consolidating that into one table. So you just go to this one table and it tells you what's allowed for all the different zone districts in town. And in that table, it'll identify what type of use requires a limited review use based on the zone district that you're in. And then we would work to consolidate the standards that go with these different limited review uses and consolidate that into a new section of the code. So it's ideally you go to the use table, you say, okay, I want to do a laundromat in the 100 block, and you know, I don't even know if that's allowed. This is just an example, but okay, that's a limited review use. And then you go to this section with all the standards and you say, okay, what are the standards for a laundromat? So that's kind of the idea behind limited review uses. And what we're recommending is that limited review uses be handled at the staff level. And the reason for that is it's really just an opportunity for staff to say, okay, you're doing, again, a laundromat in the 100 block area. Does what you're trying to do comply with the standards for a laundromat? And so it's just ensuring compliance with these standards that will be in the code. It's just sort of an opportunity to check the boxes, and we believe that's appropriate to be handled at the staff level.
Matt, can I make one small edit, please, on the third bullet point? And maybe
Sure.
I'm reading it incorrectly, but if you could create a single-use table for the land use code that lists all land uses are permitted.
Oh.
Or should it say that are permitted?
Right. Yep.
Thank you. Okay, does anybody have any comments on that?
Only that this is a general comment, it's not specific to this exactly, but given the fact that my gut tells me that we are part of this expeditious process, we are obviously creating more opportunity for the staff to move things along. And I would just caution that maybe we have a provision, whether it's at planning meetings or council meetings, but somewhere I would put it out there that maybe it's important to just have it at you know, if the staff makes a number of decisions, approvals, whatever, in a given 2-week period, that at the next council meeting or at the next planning and zoning meeting, we get briefed as to what those decisions were. As in, like, hey, we looked at a limited use and we decided it was good, and so, you know, XYZ company is going to be now doing something in the 100 block, or they're gonna be putting in a laundromat. And we made that decision and we're just letting you know. Like, what do you guys think of that?
But what if we choose to disagree? Can it be called up?
I don't know, but I'm just saying,
Yes,
like, if
it's
we don't
not.
know about it, that's
Well,
one
first
thing.
of all,
If there's, I just feel like there's gonna be a bunch of things that are now gonna be, you know, approved, even like, for instance, like signs are now approved, right? You guys approved signs. But I think you guys have been saying like, hey, we approved a sign last week and we get briefed on it. At least we're kept in the know.
So we get a staff report like.
It's like a
Michelle
little
said, yeah.
staff report of like things that got approved, and if we want to call it up, we can at that point call it up. Whether or not we have the authority to overturn it, I don't know if that's not really what we're talking about.
Well, first of all, we're gonna have a chart of everything that's allowed in different areas, right?
Right.
And then a limited use, depending where it was going to go, would go according to that chart. So you've got something to check it against. And then-
Yeah, that's just one thing. Like,
Right.
there's a bunch of things that we're
Right.
sort of deciding are better handled at a staff level. And yet,
Oh,
I
no, I
still
know.
feel like we would want to know.
Yeah, I think that's something that we've certainly talked about and right now, technically, a limited review is administratively approved. And it's administered through a zoning letter of, or certificate of zoning compliance. I'm actually working on one of those right now. And
the updates.
so, but I think that's a great suggestion.
That's all it's planning, like. Us being out there is great, and I would think not us, but if council decided there was an issue with something, they could probably call it up or something, but that's not our deal, but it just keeps us in the know.
No, I think
Right.
having that little update form or something is perfect.
Are the things that you're talking about staff approving, do they have to be ratified by the council?
No,
It's a done deal. Okay, good.
that's the way it is right now.
Anybody could go through and appeal staff's decision.
Yeah.
But, you know, but they could do that for any decision made in town.
Yeah.
I don't
Continue.
little babies, I don't.
I mean,
Okay.
What a roof permit.
Is that okay with you, Matt? You got it?
Got it. Thank
Next,
you.
please.
Planned unit developments. And so, what we have talked about, and Scott or Madison, correct me if I'm wrong here. But typically there's two types of planned unit developments. There's minor and major. And there's obviously criteria for what qualifies as a minor and major PUD. Scott, does the town currently have different classifications for PUDs?
I don't believe so.
Okay. So that'll be something that we're recommending, that there be these two different types of classifications for minor and major PUDs. And again, that there be very specific criteria so that it's clear to somebody who's trying to do a PUD what category they fall into. And then for these different types of PUDs, there would be different types of amendment process. So if you had an approved PUD and you needed to modify it at some point in time, there would be a minor amendment process and a major amendment process. So let me know if this is getting too confusing, because we're using the kind of same terminology here. But the amendment process, minor amendments are typically pretty insignificant changes to a PUD, whereas a major PUD amendment it would be a more significant change. And there's typically criteria that distinguishes the different types of amendments and whether what you want to change qualifies as a minor or major. And so for minor PUDs and major PUDs, each of those different types of PUDs would have in the code, we would incorporate criteria for what constitutes a minor amendment or a major amendment. And what we're recommending is that determination. Again, it's sort of ensuring that the applicant is being held to whatever criteria is outlined in the code, that determination of whether or not your change to your PUD is a minor or major amendment, that be handled at the staff level. And again, the reason for that is if you're from an applicant standpoint, it would be helpful to know which category you're in, so you know how to craft your application if you're trying to amend a PUD. Did I miss anything?
No, I don't think so. I think I did though. So the code does currently have a minor planned unit development provision. And it says the concept development plan and the preliminary development plan may be combined if the proposed project meets the following criteria. Less than 10 dwelling units, and that's it. So anything, I guess any PUD less than 10 dwelling units technically could be considered a minor PUD. I don't know that the town has ever used that. So we've got a basis to start, but there's not much to that section. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to.
So then on page 26, under notes, it says type A minor subdivision, a subdivision creating not more than 6. You're saying it says not more.
That's different. That's a subdivision. And then I just wanted to touch on the current code language regarding changes to approved plans. There is a provision for minor deviations for things that are technical or engineering related in nature. And then the other changes are major, right? So there's already some inkling of process there. There's not much to it though, and there's not a lot of criteria. Other codes have a little bit better standards for or criteria for deciding what minor or major changes.
So right now,
So-
all changes come through planning, which is the suggestion that administratively staff can handle minor. Today they can't.
Today they can.
They can.
Yep. So
Okay.
there's already a provision in there for minor deviations from a previously approved PUD plan.
Okay.
But I think it could be more robust as a process and criteria. So,
This is, pretty detailed, for me to pay attention, so some of this is new to me, so I guess. Regardless, the minor and the major still comes to planning and zoning, you're just talking about whether or not you tell somebody this is a major or a minor, and how that's detailed, or what's the word?
there would still be, I think, a provision for minor technical changes to a PUD, either a pre-PUD development plan or a PUD final plat that could be made at the staff level.
Yeah, I know,
What is a minor technical change?
Like half of, some little engineering detail that hasn't, the eyes haven't been dotted.
A lot of times those have to do with final engineering details that are not thought of even at the final plan level of detail. That once people get into the field, they're like, we paid our engineer a lot of money, but this isn't actually gonna work.
like some of this stuff, the little final details of over there. The last little stuff in Minturn North.
Well, we'll see. I mean, they, when they start breaking
It hasn't been
around,
shown yet, so.
Oh, okay.
Matt, I don't know if you've got a good
I might
explanation.
not ask the question, right?
Like they had put in the PUD at sidewalk, and then that's what we approved, but then the sidewalk shifted by 6 inches.
You got it.
Due to underground pipe that we didn't know was existed.
Yeah.
Then that would be considered like a minor change, like it doesn't impact the concept or materially impact the PUD.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Yeah. I asked the question wrong, minor
You
and
didn't.
major, I was just talking about the PEDs in general.
Oh, minor.
Major change would
As
be like,
far
we're
as-
not putting in.
as far as-
now.
You know.
It's the actual change things,
yes.
whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like.
I don't want to be in the business of approving even minor PUDs.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah, we approved a PUD last week. Sorry, we didn't tell her.
yeah, I'm just learning, I'd make sure.
Thank you for clarifying.
And I will, I mean, I guess as another example, if there's typos in the PUD guide or something like that, that are somehow missed through the approval process, that could constitute a minor amendment where it's like, we need to go back through this thing and address these typos. It doesn't really change the intent or essentially the nuts and bolts of the PUD. It's just making some fine tuning.
Next. Please.
All right, sign permits. So right now, it's my understanding that staff does the review. It already makes it does the review of sign permits and also makes a decision on sign permits. In the code, it technically says that decision is supposed to be made by the planning commission. So what we're recommending is making sign permits an administrative process, which is already done now, but essentially codifying that in the updated land use code. For sign variances, we're recommending that there be a specific process and review criteria for that. I think right now the code just defers to a zoning variance. Which a zoning variance, again, a zoning variance is sort of a variance from setback requirements, building height requirements, things like that. The criteria for a zoning variance is typically a bit different than what you would have for review criteria for a sign variance. For example, you know, it'd be hard for somebody to request a sign variance based on the basis of some sort of undue hardship. That could be a hard criteria to justify. So what we're recommending is kind of having a unique or custom process and review criteria for sign variances rather than just deferring to the zoning variance requirements. And then finally is to develop a review process for master sign programs. And when I'm talking about a master sign program, that's a comprehensive plan for signs for a multi-tenant building or a development where there's going to be multiple buildings with businesses inside. So kind of an overall plan for signage for a development. So having a process for that. And what we're recommending is that review and approval of a master sign program be handled administratively.
And what are we proposing for a variance for a sign?
I don't know that we haven't, at least Madison and Scott and I haven't discussed what that would be. We, right now we're just kind of talking about things at a high level, and then we'll bring back the specific changes to the code language for you guys to look at. So I guess my response is we haven't figured that out yet.
Jeff, are you talking about who would review the sign variance?
Hmm.
I would think that it would still be y'all, not us.
Yeah, I would think that personally, I think I would just make the suggestion that if there's a applicant that's proposing a variance to the sign, especially if it's very visible, whether it's on Main Street or anywhere else, to the neighbors, etc., that it goes through a public process. Because that's the one place where I think that could get a little haywire with somebody could, you know,
Staff
thing
will
that
never
comes to
be
mind.
approving variances for zoning variances or any other
Yeah.
variances. So,
Anybody that wants a variance to a sign should go through. public process.
very good point.
Agreed. Is that what you did? I didn't have anything to speak up on this.
Okay,
I agree.
I agree. Variances, planning commission.
Next.
All right. So that wraps up the zoning application, the different types of zoning applications that are in the code. So now we'll shift gears to subdivisions. And again, I'll just jump right into the recommended changes. So the first type of subdivision that we have is a correction plat. And this is actually buried in chapter 16, which is the section of the code that deals with zoning. So our first recommendation is to pull that out of the zoning section and move it to chapter 17, which deals with subdivisions. Secondly is adding some detail about what exactly is required to be submitted for a correction plat and the review process and review criteria for correction plats. And I'll back up a second. A correction plat, the intent, my experience with those is it's to address technical errors on a plat that's already been approved. So again, if there's typos or there's some issues with the legal description, things like that, it's just an opportunity for somebody, because those are legal documents and they're pretty important to get correct. That's the avenue that people have to go back and address those technical issues that might have been approved on a plat and need to be cleaned up. And right now, the code doesn't have a lot of specificity in terms of what's required for an application for a correction plat, or the review process for that, or when you get an application, what criteria you use to evaluate whether or not to approve the correction plat.
Would a correction, or maybe this is a better, broader question, so which of these like correction plat, amended final plat, I think it would be just those two that would potentially come through with PUD amendment also, right? Or would they be independent? Would they come to get, like, if there's a PUD amendment, would it also maybe potentially come with a correction plat? Because we want to make sure that there wasn't one that was going to, had to be signed by administrative, and then there was another one that, it could be that, do you see what I'm saying?
I do, I think. So I think it would be rare if a PUD amendment was also needing a final plat amendment.
Okay,
We
or
are
a correct-
processing that very thing with Belden right now because of the settlement agreement.
Okay,
But that's the first and only time I've ever seen that done. So usually plat corrections are just independent, one-off
okay,
things. If a PUD was being amended to increase its size, that would be a major PUD amendment. If they were grabbing some other property next to the PUD, they would do a PUD amendment, a major PUD amendment. They would also do an amended final plat for the subdivision that is part of that PUD
okay.
and whatever the subdivision is next door, if it's platted property already. So they would amend their plat to grab this other property. Those are other situations where you'd have those running concurrently. But I think that's pretty rare. Usually it's a correction plat to correct some technical thing, or an amended final plat to move lot lines or do things like that within an approved subdivision.
Okay.
And we'll get into a couple more of these different subdivision types and amended.
It looks
final-
like all would sync in those even rare cases. It looks like it would sync with what we just decided upon with the PUDs minor and major, amendments minor being administratively approved. But that just like, I just want to make sure that everything reconciles. So if the documents that typically come together, that we didn't have one document that was staff approved and another that had to come to planning, but it sounds like we're good in this space.
Yeah, I
Okay.
don't see them generally tracking together
Oh,
in most instances, but
okay, thank you.
okay.
And right now, the way the code's structured, I believe, correction plat, the decision whether to approve a correction plat is handled administratively. And Scott, does that, if staff approves it, then does it go to town council for essentially on the consent agenda for sort of?
I have to check the code, Matt, with things like amended final plats, even minor subdivisions. Administrative replat, those are reviewed and approved at the staff level. And in some cases, they're signed by the mayor. They don't go to council for review.
Okay.
The planning director signs it, the mayor signs it. For those administrative plats.
The code specifically says the planning director without a hearing. May approve.
For a correction plat, yeah.
Yeah, so I don't think it even goes to council on consent.
And I've never processed a correction plat in 8 years or 7 years.
Okay.
Doesn't happen that often.
It's coming next week.
Cheers.
Guaranteed, just because you said that.
All right, moving on. So the next category of subdivision is administrative replat. And we looked through the kind of the purpose of an administrative replat. And it needs to be clarified in the code. It's not, it's a bit confusing as to what the purpose of an administrative replat is. So that code language needs to be cleaned up. It does look like an administrative replat is intended to be a process for modifying the boundaries of a piece of property. And what I'm familiar with is the terminology I'm familiar with is lot line adjustment. So if you have a piece of property and you and your neighbor decide, we're gonna move the boundary between our two lots over 10 feet, this is the process you would go through to do that. It doesn't allow you to create new lots typically. It's just to modify your property boundaries for whatever reason. And this is something that has been a lot line adjustment application or subdivision type is something that has been identified as a need by staff. So this administrative replat, there might be an opportunity here to just change administrative replat and reclassify it as a lot line adjustment. And again, there's criteria that apply to this type of subdivision where it's really intended to modify property boundaries, and in some cases it allows you, if you say own two lots and you want to consolidate them into one lot, this is an avenue to do that, and you just eliminate the boundary between your two lots that you own.
So how does this apply in terms of process? Because I understand it one way, and I'm interested to hear what Scott, in your opinion, is when it comes to properties who are quiet titling into the middle of the Eagle River and increasing their lot by large amounts. And it seems like the way the process has been, the way I understand it, has been going is that, and it only applies to certain parts of town, but they go to a judge first. Well, no, let me back up. They hire a surveyor. Surveyor draws their lot into the middle of the river. They take that new survey plat to the judge. They get a ruling by a judge that it's legal. They file it at the county level. And it never comes before anybody here in town.
The county has stopped accepting this.
They have.
Yeah, we can talk offline.
It's
I go on out to 7-year clock. And after 7 years, they have a right to it, but an actual quiet, like a real quiet title. Kind of different.
But what's the difference, I guess, between a quiet title and a
Quiet title the real quiet title has to be posted in the paper. You're supposed to have signatures of the heirs of
Heirs.
the original owners of the property, which was the Baldoffs in the majority of town. Back in the day, it's posted in the paper, pretty much, it gives the town a right to object to it. And if you don't have, I'm not quite sure.
What you're talking about is the quick claim.
He's,
You're talking about quick claim.
quick claim deeds, they file it, and if they pay taxes on it for 7
Yep,
years, then they
makes
have a
sense.
legal right.
But the county has stopped recognizing quick claims. They're making you go back to do
But the
that.
real,
Their actual quiet
the
title.
real full-blown quiet titles,
Yep.
the proper, as far as going to the middle of the river,
They don't-
it's all questionable. I always thought that you had to go, the furthest you could go was to your 30-foot setback. And then you're supposed to post it in the paper, and everybody's supposed to be notified, you have to have the heirs, and pretty much back in like 06, the town said that no one's gonna give too many more titles
But what I'm getting at is like, is that circumnavigating this process?
I don't think so.
It certainly presents problems. Based on what the options that we have. Administrative replat doesn't quite fit. Like if someone does that and they have now these two parcels that aren't technically merged, but they're owned by the same person. Administrative replat, you need to base that administrative replat on a previous subdivision. Amended final plat should be based on amendments to lot lines or other things within a previously approved final plat. A lot of these lots on the river are not part of a final plat. They were annexed to town, so they were
Never platted.
But you need,
That's
another
another
big one signed by everybody and the brother, including the
Yeah.
mayor and intern. pretty much for it to be like a final Mylar or whatever it's called, or plat, or what Scott's saying, like, as far as people saying that they have this, and I wouldn't wanna be, I don't know if I would wanna be staff eliminating that lot line.
No, I'm just saying, like, this is
Yeah, that's.
obviously the people that do that want to be quiet about it till it's done. And legal. And then they're like, oh, by the way, now I want to redraw my plat. And not have these two parcels that I own. I want to combine them into one, because they're not combining it into one town or the county, are they? It's two pieces. They have a new piece.
Then you need a new plat or whatever Scott's saying, if you wanna combine it into one.
You should talk to
The
Christine.
title company and mayor Minturn. Everybody signs it for it to actually,
They have to come through a.
You should go to a
subdivision.
judge.
Yeah, they do that first, but then they. If they want full use of the property and there's a property line right in the middle of it, they have to eliminate that property line to be able to build a house over it or whatever. they
Sell
wanna do.
it.
Yeah, I mean, they can still sell it if they have clean title to both of these parcels, and just because they own them. The same owner owns both parcels, the county may tax it as one parcel, but technically it's never been combined. If that makes sense.
It does, I guess I'm not trying to just stir the water for no reason. I'm just wondering if this conversation applies to that.
I think it definitely applies to what we're talking about, because that's, as Matt mentioned. There is a request, there is plenty of thinking and conversations that have been had with Mike Sawyer and Richard Peterson Creamer about this issue. Not just about quiet titling of parcels into the river, but other instances where we have people that have gone through quiet title or they own two lots. And they want to combine them. We don't have a real great clean process to do that, particularly because we're dealing with a lot of old parcels that are just created as part of the Taylor edition or South Minturn edition that didn't come through what we would recognize as a formal subdivision with drainage reports and access reports and all that kind of stuff that's listed in our code right now. You can do this kind of lot combination thing or whatever if you've already gone through a formal. That doesn't fit a lot of our situations,
So
so
this administrative replat covers that.
it's, in my mind, it doesn't. Because even the administrative replat relies on the existence of previously subdivided property that came through a process that had reports done and all the things that we're supposed to have looked at before we approve a subdivision, right? So.
Are there subdivisions that are minor or major subdivisions, old Balda subdivisions or whatever in town that are called subdivisions that were never subdivided?
Those actually might be.
All of Southtown is called a subdivision, but it's just an annexation plat.
Right, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
like,
Well,
all
Right.
Scott, my recommendation for this would be, I mean, what I'm familiar with is with lot line adjustments, it's essentially if I'm not familiar with the process where you have to the only way this applies is if you can show that your property was part of a previously, a previous subdivision. What I'm familiar with is if you can essentially demonstrate that you legally own the two properties, if you're consolidating two lots, here's the legal boundaries, you have a surveyor draw that up, and you just show that you're trying to, again, if you're consolidating two lots, eliminate the property boundary between the two of them. That's always been kind of my understanding, is if it doesn't matter if it was subdivided before, it's just if you're trying to modify the boundaries of an existing piece of property within, in this case, within Minturn, this is the process to do that.
Yeah, absolutely agree. There's nothing but opportunities to improve the code and our process here, because I guess that's what I'm trying to say, is it really doesn't work. This might be a great example of part of our code that was grabbed from somewhere else in Colorado that, okay, here it is, right?
Yeah, it does.
it never really fit the town, and I don't know if this is what we mean by keeping Minturn, but um. Yeah,
That's how Minturn stays. Minturn.
perhaps. So Matt, yes, by all means, we need to create some new language and a new process that allows for people to combine lots if they want to combine lots with criteria that actually makes sense.
I'll throw something out there since apparently we've talked about river quiet titles and this and that. You know, like I said, I bought my property, I didn't buy a title on anything, okay? And lady that I bought my property from homesteaded it. And when Old Dog was the first one to ever acquire a title. And in turn, and the lady I bought my property from acquired title as well, both Eagle Street properties. The real deal where you had to track down the families, get the signatures, go get a court order, post it in the paper, and blah, 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 to do a real quiet title. That being said, when I bought the property, that lot line had not been eliminated. And this is a long time ago, okay? And when I went to build a deck, I was told that you can't build a deck because you're going over your lot line. So I got a letter from Down Attorney, which, you know, God bless him, he's not here anymore, but not that way, he's died. But you know, and nowadays I'm grateful that I actually got that, because I got a letter saying to eliminate this lot line, you have to get the Mylar or the plat or whatever it is. So just if you ever want to look some Boyd property, it's not the address. You might get lost. You might get lost if you look for it. But anyway, back 30 years ago, that was a requirement, you know, from the town, which was a pretty extensive step to do to eliminate that line. But said and done, it worked well, and it's good to have.
And
It's not
we probably today rely on kind of the same code provisions, but I just don't think it's really as clean as it should be. Right? So Alan may have said, well, here's our only available process, please do this, and it's close enough. And quite frankly, we've done that a couple times since I've been here too, because we had to pick what was the closest fit.
But and at the time I was like, really? And you know, but looking back, I'm like, mine's pretty clean. You know, like I said, I didn't quite title or anything, and I've had signed by, I think, all guy, I don't know, whoever the mayor was 30 years ago.
Right.
So enough about that.
We had a couple in the 90s. I don't know.
Well, so we're gonna, you know, back to the, I guess we were talking about the administrative replat. Creating something that is a lot line adjustment file type is more appropriate and is in line with what Matt's used to seeing and I'm used to seeing in other jurisdictions. It is what it is. It's a lot line adjustment. And in some jurisdictions, Fair Play, for instance, there's a lot line adjustment, there's a lot line elimination, and they both fit under the exemption plat process as an umbrella. I don't think that's the right answer either, because an exemption plat is something completely different. But anyways, I think whether it's, you know, what we call it or how we handle it, I think there's room for improvement. And I know Mike has specific ideas on how he wants to clean up the subdivision regs. So after tonight's meeting, Matt and I and Madison will get with Mike, and probably just Mike, not Richard, and let him know that now's the time where we need his input and all his notes on things that need to be cleaned up too.
Okay.
So.
And the administrative replat process right now is it's a staff decision. Staff does have the option of calling it up to or referring it to town council. I think that would remain That's what I'm familiar with for lot line adjustments. It's typically handled at the staff level because it's modifying property boundaries. It's sort of it's not really a significant thing. And typically criteria for a lot line adjustment says you can't create more lots. So you're not able to further subdivide your property. It's just modifying property boundaries or consolidating properties. And typically there's a limit on the number of properties you can consolidate through this process, but
so you just made a comment that it would be called up to council. Would a lot line adjustment usually be with a design application, or would it always be independent? Just questioning whether it should really be council or should it be planning that sees those.
so if somebody was doing, I work for the town of Debec, and an example there of something like this is the county is doing a community center, and they own 3 different properties. And the building they were trying to do went across the property boundaries, which is a problem for setbacks and other reasons. So the town required them to consolidate those properties into one through the town's lot line adjustment process. That was sort of a separate deal that was handled administratively. And then the review of the actual building design and things like that, that's a separate process. So that would be, I could see something where somebody was doing a major development and they needed to consolidate a certain number of properties to make that project work. I would still think the lot line adjustment aspect of that would be handled administratively. If there's an option in the code for Scott or whoever happens to be the planning director at the time to say, I need town council to make a decision. I'm not going to make a decision on this. That's where it would be referred to council, but otherwise it would be the lot line adjustment would be handled administratively, and then the building design and the review of that would be sort of a separate process that they may go in unison. Does that make sense?
No, maybe I think I asked the question incorrectly. So all the other application plats that we had looked at, I thought most of them were going to planning if there was, versus, and I'm just reviewing that. So I was just trying to make sure that lot line should go to council, not if it does need to be referred, if it goes to council versus planning. But it sounds like it would go to council, all plats go to council. No, that's what I'm trying to say.
No.
Okay, thanks. It's just you got it.
Yeah, so there's, and I think Matt's trying to make the distinction that with this particular file type, this administrative replat, there is a provision that if I or whoever's sitting in the planning director's seat is not comfortable administratively approving it, it can be referred to, not called up, but referred to. So I can send it to the council, but
Why send it to council versus planning?
because council is the body. that-
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah.
Let's just sign the plat.
Yeah.
We got it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah,
Sorry, slow ball.
it's okay. This is a lot. Because you guys don't normally deal with most of these things. They happen upstairs and.
At the North Pole.
Can we move on?
Yes.
Sure.
Subdivision variance?
Okay. So subdivision variance, this is a bit of an awkward provision in the code. It allows town council to grant variances from the requirements, essentially the town subdivision requirements. It's unusual because there aren't really requirements in chapter 17 that seem appropriate to request a variance from. Chapter 17 right now is more, here's the different types of subdivision the town allows, here's your application requirements and your review process. There's typically, when you're requesting a variance, it's a variance from certain standards like the size of the lots in your subdivision have to be a certain size, things like that. And there's really not those standards for subdivisions in chapter 17. So what we've talked about is first looking for some at least some minimum standards to incorporate in chapter 17 for subdivisions in Minturn. And again, an example might be the blocks in subdivisions can only be a certain number of feet long by a certain number of feet wide. That's just one example of subdivision standards. Just some minimum standards to help provide guidance to folks that are doing subdivisions to ensure that what they're trying to do is compatible with what the community wants to see. And then as part of this standards, allowing for a waiver opportunity where if somebody is doing a subdivision, they can as part of their subdivision application, they can say, I want to request a waiver from whatever standards I don't agree with, or I want to do something a little different, and give an applicant an opportunity to request a waiver in conjunction with their subdivision application. So that the subdivision and any request for a waiver, those are reviewed together and decided on by whoever the decision-making body is. So ultimately, my point is that the subdivision variance allowance is kind of strange. And so I think we're recommending we change it to a waiver process.
I don't. It's a lot to take in. It's definitely a lot to take in, you know, I don't know. You know, when I see the word variance, you know, I know earlier we talked about variances on the P and Z. I'm not quite sure I understand 100%.
So this would be something that, you know, because there are certain, you know, major subdivisions typically are something that go to council. Right now, they go, a final plat for a major subdivision comes to Planning and Zoning Commission as well. But I think this is anticipating that in the future, they would just go to council. And if there were a set of variances that went along with a major subdivision, it would be their purview to review those.
As far as that, yeah, I mean, as far as that, I got thrown off with that, and then the minor subdivision over here not going to the planning commission, and I don't know if that's something to, you know, I know that we had other subdivisions with, you know, some smaller things being approved by staff, but like a minor subdivision, like, I don't even know if I'm reading it right at this point. It's a lot of brain input. I'm really good at 5 to 20. They're a little slow, but you know, over drop it down to the minor subdivision type B. You know, I'm not sure if that currently went to planning and zoning, and now I don't even know if that's. Does anybody else have a thought on that?
I have a question. Or I have a thought, or I have an example. The end of Boulder Street, which was a minor subdivision. How did that relate to this? Because that's an example that might help.
Good example. I know what you're talking about.
Tom Sullivan.
The RBLA subdivision,
the what?
RBLA subdivision.
Okay.
Not sure who RBLA is, but. Yeah, as far as I know, that was a minor subdivision because it created less than 6 lots. And
But
was,
did that not come forward?
I don't know that it did.
I don't think it did, but it did go in front of council.
Well, this says on this, I don't know whether this is, I got confused because I don't know whether like this is a new chart or an old chart. And so I can't see the difference in between the both. But like the minor subdivision type B here doesn't, for like up to 5 units, doesn't seem to go to us or council. And
That is an existing chart.
is that an existing chart?
Yeah, that's existing.
Is that those?
So if it's on land that hasn't been previously platted, it goes to council. If it has been previously platted, then it doesn't go to either of you.
Oh, and I know where I'm getting confused. You're talking about platting dirt. If somebody's getting built on them, it comes to us, right? Is that where
Yeah.
I'm just off a little? Okay.
Good way to think about it.
So another way, the subdivision variance is awkward because typically when you're requesting a variance, it's from some sort of design standards that are in the code, whether that's your setback requirements for zoning, building height, things like that. For subdivisions, sometimes there's design standards that communities have that spell out how or give direction to a developer for how the subdivision needs to be designed. And so that's typically where you would have a variance, or another term would be a waiver process, where as you're going through a subdivision process, whether it's a major subdivision or a minor subdivision, if you as a subdivider said, I don't want to strictly adhere to these design standards that the town has for subdivisions, I'm going to request a variance or a waiver as part of my subdivision application. That's where I'm familiar with a variance. This provision right now, because the town doesn't really have design standards for subdivisions, I don't know what this variance would apply to. It's really an awkward thing to have in there. Because
Can we take the term, can we take the word variance out of that?
Subdivision variance out.
yeah, so that's what we're recommending, is it actually becomes, instead of a variance, it becomes a waiver. And it allows somebody who's going through really any of the town subdivision processes, and maybe that's not correct, maybe minor and major subdivision processes, it allows them to request a waiver from subdivision design standards. And the other part of that is the town doesn't have subdivision design standards right now. So what we're recommending is, as part of this code update, we incorporate at least some minimum standards for new subdivisions in Minturn. And that's where if somebody down the road did a subdivision and they didn't want to comply with whatever those standards were, they'd have this waiver opportunity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I just, yeah, so, but basically, just because I love to repeat myself, I guess, you know, but anything, for example, anything besides, anything that would need like a regular variance in regards to setbacks or heights wouldn't be waived by changing
No.
that,
Correct.
correct?
This is great.
Unless it would, if it's a subdivision that's like actually changing the setbacks, like I'm thinking about the enclave, like that's where
Yeah.
this would have applied to.
I have one example that was on Taylor, and it was a subdivision that had to do with the common property boundary between two homes that had already been developed. And the subdivider couldn't meet the side yard setback because of some physical improvements that would have been hugely expensive to undo. The neighboring property owner was okay with moving the lot line slightly, but didn't want to rip out his retaining wall and do all this other stuff. So we granted a variance in order to allow for this subdivision, which by itself created a non-conforming situation or exacerbated a non-conforming situation for setbacks. Whether that was the right mechanism to handle it or not, we couldn't figure out any other way to allow this to actually happen and clean up this situation. There were other benefits to letting the subdivision happen or the lot line adjustment. That's the only example I can think of where we granted a variance as part of a subdivision.
I would think like in that example, I think that potentially that we would have supported that anyway, but
But it would still, the waivers would be handled administratively. Right, waivers would be administrative is what I'm hearing.
That one, I think because it was a variance, it had to go to council.
But
The
we
subdivision.
get rid of the subdivision variance is what the proposal is, and move it on to waivers. Great.
what's different?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
The waiver would
Because
have
there's
come
no-
to, would have been handled administratively, or would that waiver have come to us?
There's no standard to have a variance from. There's nothing to say, I want a variance from this standard, because there isn't. So what they're proposing is to do away with the word variance and create standards.
And then
Of
have a
which, if
waiver.
you wanna have a waiver from certain parts of those because you don't wanna adhere to them, then you apply and say, I wanna subdivide and I want a waiver from this.
Cause I don't want to tear my wall
C,
down.
and F.
Yeah.
And then it goes to council or.
But the way it's here, it doesn't go to council or us, unless I'm reading it wrong. Am I reading it wrong?
You know, the way so our existing code language, it says upon application by the subdivider, the town council may at its discretion grant variances from some or all or any requirements of this chapter based on the following criteria. So it
Yeah, no, they can do whatever they
should
want.
say waiver, not a variance.
No, but it's on there then.
But the council approves the waiver, not the commission. Okay,
Correct.
Yeah.
I'm good with that too.
Oh, no.
Because
That's
they
our
would
current
decide.
language, but if we move to something else that allows the subdivider to similarly request the waivers from certain design or subdivision requirements, is that what you're saying, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I've seen it done is if there's standards for certain design standards for subdivisions, there's a process for somebody, again, an example for a design standard for a subdivision would say the blocks in your subdivision have to be 400 feet long or a minimum of 400 feet long by 300 feet wide. And say a subdivider comes in and says, well, I'd rather do blocks that are 200 feet long by 100 feet wide. They could request a waiver as part of their subdivision application. So it would kind of go, you would have to request your waiver when you submit as part of your application for a subdivision. So they go hand in hand. And then
And the
through
waiver goes to council, right?
yeah, I mean, it would go, in my mind, it would go to whoever the decision maker is. And so if it's a major subdivision, that would be decided on by council. If it's a minor subdivision, it looks like that, depending on the type, that would go to council too. So yeah, I mean, I think most of the times it would go to council for them to ultimately decide whether or not to approve the waiver as part of the subdivision.
But it also could come through just because of the timing of it as part of a design review application with buildings attached to it, in which case we might see it.
So there's a difference there because when you're subdividing, you're just looking at the layout of your lots. When you're actually building something on your property, then you're dealing with setbacks and building height. So that would be a zoning variance. I know it's confusing.
But it could happen concurrently, could it not?
You're saying like a PUD or some other.
Well, no, I don't wanna go that far. That's gonna-
Smaller ones, like minor
I think it's like-
subdivisions.
I'm thinking of like, maybe for instance, like if Woody, a couple weeks ago, when his thing came through, if he already had plans attached to what they want to do with Luceros at the time. And he was proposing it all in one big enchilada, and he was like, I want to subdivide, I want to cut this piece off the front, and I want to change the zoning on it, and I also want to build this. Maybe just, the perfect storm of it all comes through and it happens to be in front of us, but jurisdictionally, I think it's not up to us to decide those variances.
Right.
It's gonna be up to council
Yeah.
or waivers.
Waivers.
The waivers by council and, yeah, no, I would have done it this way.
I think we beat it to death.
Yeah.
You've beaten it today.
There's gonna be some standards.
Yeah, I don't.
Be coming back in front of us.
Yeah.
Yes,
I think the direction is that we're good with creating some minimal standards.
I agree with you.
Of which there will be a process to ask for a waiver from
Correct.
Correct.
moving.
Yeah, and
All
doing away with this subdivision variance because it's rather awkward.
Correct. It's not the right terminology.
Right. All right.
Major subdivisions.
Major subdivision. So right now, if you're doing a major subdivision, the town has a two-step process. The first step is called a preliminary subdivision plat. And the second step is called the final subdivision plat. And so what we've talked about is allowing for an optional third step, which is called a sketch plan. And a sketch plan is in many places is, again, it's an optional first step for somebody who wants to look at subdividing their property. They can come in with sort of essentially a napkin sketch to the town. And it either goes to planning commission and or town council or stops at planning commission or goes straight to council. You know, the process, we'll have to figure that out. But it gives somebody an opportunity to come in and say, what do you think? And kind of test the waters before they spend a lot of time and money on the preliminary subdivision plat stage, which requires a bunch of engineering and design work. So we're just ultimately recommending that the sketch plan, that there be an option for a sketch plan in the town's code and that be optional. And if somebody doesn't want to do that, they can skip it and just go straight to preliminary plat. And then the second recommendation that we have is for final subdivision plats, which is the last step in the major subdivision process, that just goes straight to town council for review. So it's a one step. Obviously it comes to staff first for initial review and then would go straight to council.
No question.
Good with it.
That was
We
a
better-
fast one.
We better catch everything at
Preliminary.
preliminary plat.
We're bringing the drawing, we discuss it, right? Pretty much. Here we go, that's what I want to do, let me know before I spend 50.
It's still gonna go. Still gonna get to the public and town council. So,
And often people wait till that.
right.
Subdivision improvements agreement.
All right. So this is just kind of an FYI. We want to work with the town engineer and the town attorney to look for opportunities to strengthen the requirements for subdivision improvements agreements. I have some ideas and want to work with staff and the town's engineer and attorney on those. Ultimately, a subdivision improvements agreement is an agreement between the town and a developer. So that's decided on by town council. There's certain elements that's good to have in your code. Certain requirements for subdivision improvements agreements to ensure that the town is protected if, for example, a developer fails to fulfill their obligations with installing water or sewer lines, things like that. And that's about the gist of it.
Michael? Amanda? Mountaintop Estate Ranch lots.
This again is sort of it should be an easy one. The Mountaintop Estate and Ranch lots, they have their kind of their own unique subdivision process. And I think that's been addressed through different agreements that are already in place. So what we're recommending is that those become their own section under the subdivision chapter so that anybody who's doing a subdivision in the mountaintop area, they can go straight to that section of the code and know what they have to do. Just sort of improving usability of the code recommendation. And there's no changes to those. It's just taking the language that's already in the land use code and make it easier to find.
Major subdivisions and amended final plats.
So, under the minor subdivision section, there's 3 different types of subdivisions. There's a minor subdivision A, a minor subdivision B, and then an amended final plat. If amended final plats make sense to keep as a unique type of subdivision in town, the recommendation is that those be pulled out from under minor subdivision, just become their own section of the code, again, to improve usability of the code, making it easy to find those. I think something that we at the staff level need to do is compare amended final plats with correction plats. They may be essentially the same thing. So if it makes sense, we're recommending that correction plats and amended final plats just become one type of application or subdivision, rather than having these 2 very similar types of subdivisions. I think that's confusing. So if there's an opportunity to consolidate those, I think that's the direction we'll go. And if it makes sense to keep them separate, we'll do that. Minor subdivision type B allows for subdivision up to 6 lots of I think it's of an existing or piece of property that's been previously subdivided. And then it also allows for essentially subdivisions of duplexes, townhomes, condominiums, things like that. So what I've talked with Scott and Madison about is maybe pulling the category or the type of subdivision for condominiums and townhomes, pulling that out from under this umbrella of minor subdivision B so that it's its own type of subdivision again, so it's easy to find. And just hopefully that improves usability. And then finally, we'll just work, one of our goals by updating or working on this minor subdivision section of the code is to ensure that the submittal requirements for the different type of minor subdivisions makes sense based on the type of subdivision that's being proposed, and also ensuring consistency where appropriate for the different application submittal requirements.
Okay, anybody? No. Exemption plat?
Okay. So exemption plat would be a new type of or a new section under the subdivision chapter. And there needs to be a review process established for an exemption plat. Essentially, an exemption plat is a process that some places have for cleaning up or addressing lots or pieces of property that may have been created illegally. And for whatever reason, this happens from time to time. And based on what I've heard, it's an issue with some of the older properties in Minturn. They just weren't created through the proper legal channels. So this exemption plat process would be an opportunity to clean up those properties that may have some issues with them.
Final and not, I guess, final and last, Bolts Lake.
So Bolts Lake, I think when I drafted this memo, I had a bit of a misunderstanding of Bolts Lake. So I think Bolts Lake has a bit of a unique process that they're going through right now. And Scott, you can probably elaborate on this better than I can, but initially the thinking was if Bolts Lake, like the mountaintop area, had its own unique subdivision process that just become its own section under the subdivision chapter again for improving usability. But I talked to Scott about this, and I I don't know that it makes sense. Actually, this recommendation, because I think Bolts Lake will just follow the town subdivision process after they're done kind of doing what they're doing right now.
Yeah, that's correct. So Bolts Lake, through the settlement agreement, just came through and created their own exemption plat process, which they're now using, and we're processing an exemption plat to create some of those parcels that will be retained or given to the town. We do have an exemption plat process, but it's one paragraph long. So it's not, it has, again, there's lots of opportunities to create an exemption plat process for the rest of the properties in town that makes sense. And the same thing with Bolts Lake, or I should say, not the same thing with Bolts Lake. Once they get done creating these parcels through exemption plat, the settlement agreement is really clear that they will, before anything can get approved through the development review process and anything can get built, they have to come through a major subdivision and do the normal engineering studies for roads, water, sewer, all of that stuff, and follow our normal process. So there doesn't need to be a specific subdivision process for Bolts Lake properties.
But they, from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, they have their exemption plat process is such because of the language of the settlement that they can take larger parcels, carve them into pieces administratively.
Yep.
And then sell them.
Yep.
And then whoever buys them has to come through the process to develop them.
They can keep them and bring them through a process, or they can sell them and
Use them.
but there was a limit on the amount of how small they could get. So the minimum acreage is 5 acres.
I see.
The exemption plat that they have submitted absolutely complies with that. So they've got these mostly larger parcels that are the same parcels that they've been talking about through the settlement agreement
Right.
for months and months. So
But they're the only ones, from what I understand, that can do that.
yeah, and Matt's correct, is, you know, everywhere else in the world, an exemption plat is something that is used sparingly. Although it's used a lot in Eagle County, we processed a lot of exemption plats because there were so many parcels still to this day in Eagle County that have been just parceled off, given out by, you know, or sold by deed between ranchers. And usually it has to do with a parcel that didn't go through a subdivision process and is smaller than the recommended lot size in Eagle County. And the only mechanism available for people in that situation is an exemption plat. To legalize the parcel, they can still have a reasonable use of their property. They just can't do a lot of other things that are enjoyed by other people in the zone district.
Yeah, it usually fixes all the problems.
Yep.
Anybody have anything? Matt, they're shaking their heads no. Would you like to?
All
go?
right. I think I wore you guys out. Well, I know this is a lot to digest.
You are home, yes.
No, I like to say, I'd like to, you know, thank Matt, Scott, Madison, and all my people up here for putting up with me. You know, the way this whole process is going tonight, you know, talking it through. It's, you know, reading through it, I'm like, oh, I'm prepared. I like the way that it went, and now I know how we will, you know, continue to keep working at this, and I thank all of you.
I echo that.
If you have additional questions that are burning in your brain after this, Lynn's right, this will come back before you again. We'll talk about it again, but always feel free to call us. You know, for people that have been doing this for 20+ years or whatever, it's just minor B is a minor B and minor A is a minor A, and it's like totally normal for me, but it might be great for you guys, so.
I'm gonna take it in, it's just I didn't understand.
Good night, Matt. Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet. Just so everybody's aware, and Scott, let me know if I'm saying anything incorrectly here, but I think in terms of just next steps with this portion of the land use code, I think our goal on our end is to start actually take this direction from this evening. Obviously, there's some additional conversations we need to have with the town attorney, but actually start digging or working on updating the code, these sections of the code, and crafting some revised language to bring back in front of you, hopefully at some point in the near future. So that you can kind of see all this put together and hopefully it makes a bit more sense.
I agree with that, Matt.
Okay. Great.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, thank you guys. Yep. Good night.
Thanks.
Staff reports, manager report. You said, Michelle, why don't you say something?
Yeah, are there any questions or comments on the manager update that was in the packet?
Questions back.
I had one. What is going on? Legal matters, Rob Marsh, having to do with the something in fencing code, nuisance and fencing code. What is that about?
That has to do with the cemetery.
That's spicy.
I had a feeling, but I just thought
Just making some changes to our nuisance code as it relates to
And is-
wildlife impacts and
Literally.
does anybody know what Senate Bill 24174 has to do with? It doesn't say what it is.
What?
First one, Senate Local Government and Housing, Senate Bill 24174. She went to testimony, but what is that bill about?
I assume housing.
Okay. Because it says and housing.
Right, exactly.
We don't know exactly. what.
I do not know.
I want to say it has something to do with the governor trying to work towards mandating affordable housing standards.
Because I know she went with somebody from the county.
There was also that the governor, pushed in Eagle County has more local authority over, what was it? Some sort of housing like short term, so there was also, they made Eagle County have like more local authority in that space too. There's a couple big items, ticket items.
Yeah, if it's the same one I'm thinking of, it's getting some back.
Okay, if anybody finds out, let me know. Planning Commission comments.
Scott has.
I just wanted to, Michelle asked me to read something that she included in the newsletter that just went out. And her section here has to do with the community plans. So if you don't mind, I'll just read it. I don't know what else to do with it. So it says, community plans are the guiding references when local government officials determine their decision-making objectives and determinations. The town of Minturn wants to thank every resident who has taken the time to participate in these important documents, as this is the most equitable way to ensure everyone's voice is heard. With the leadership teams of the Planning Commission, Historic Preservation Commission, and Town Council utilizing plans like the Imagine Minturn 2023 Community Plan and the 2023-2025 Minturn Strategic Plan, it ensures all residents have had an opportunity to be heard because these plans are the voice of the community. Leadership hearing from their neighbors on a particular topic is valuable, but the town wants the residents of Minturn to know that everyone is listened to, and you don't have to be the neighbor or a friend of a person in leadership to have your voice heard. Minturn wants to take a fair and equitable approach to local government so that the town will continue working to improve the community plans, which are created by everyone and updated regularly. Thank you to everyone who participates in these processes. Minturn wouldn't be the amazing community it is without you. I believe the impetus for that and the motivation for that was just a reaction to some of the things that council and Michelle heard during the Planning Commission interviews. There were, I think, questions directed at how, as a Planning Commission member, do you make decisions? And the responses leaned more heavily towards I really want to listen to what my neighbors have to say and what the community has to say.
So the residents of the town, I heard it from
Just
people and I agree with.
let me finish.
I mean, let.
I'm trying to interpret and I think the concern is that from a leadership standpoint, Michelle and the mayor want to make sure that as planning commission members, as officials of the town, you're basing your decisions off the code and the community plan and not necessarily what your neighbors say. That's me reading into this. I don't want to get in the middle of this, but it made it into the newsletter, so.
Well, I guess my whole thing was with the word neighbors. I'd rather say residents.
No, I, I also heard about it and parts of it, I think that it was. Because Jeff and I both sitting here answered that question as well, and I think that in certain aspects of it, I don't think that we answered the question wrong, but I think that in regards to what Michelle is saying and what the mayor said, I think there is stuff when we're talking specifically in regards to our codes and what codes we have, that is what we have. And I think that we answered it as far as where we get our input from our neighbors. And I actually, when Jeff said, be able to look your neighbors in the eye, I think I don't think that we answered it wrong. I think that it was it could have been a multi-phased question,
I do too.
but anyway, thank you.
Having been a planning commission member in the past, I felt like I represented not just my neighbors, but the people of the town and the people that took the time to ask me about stuff. And so.
But I also think that my gut on that is also has something to do with the fact that there have been some things said in town about I think there's been some undermining of the community plan, where there have been some people that have said some things like, let's talk about doing this, and it kind of just takes the whole community plan and throws it out the window and says like, let's get everybody's opinion on this. And it's like, well, we did. It's right there. It's in black and white. Why don't we start following it and at least trying to adhere to it versus reinvent the wheel? And maybe the fact is like we went so long before we the old plan was 2009, and all of a sudden we went so long with like this ancient plan that we didn't have a plan because it was so old. But now we do have a plan, and now we need to try to listen to it.
But I
Not
think
just throw it in the garbage.
Michael made a good point. It would have been a 2-point question because Daryl said the same thing that night. And I took it the way you guys answered it. If we are dealing with DRB, if we are dealing with subdivisions, if we are dealing with PUDs, we
Yeah, we have to have findings.
right. But we also are representatives of the people of this town. And we do listen to them, and sometimes that interplays.
And I don't think either Jeff or myself or Daryl, when we answered the question, I'm pretty positive that none of us or either of us or whatever were disregarding the community plan is part of the people and part of your neighbors, but yes.
You're right, Michael. I don't think any of you were disregarding it. I just think it was what you heard and how you answered it. It was that simple.
You're also on stage too.
Yes.
Stage.
Yes.
Honestly, the first time I ran for this, Hawk was the mayor, and I stood up there and he said, "Why do you want to be up here?" And I said, "Because I think our code is gray and we need to revisit the code. There's too many loopholes in the code and it needs to be more black and white." He's like, "Okay, see you later." Didn't get elected.
Who else was that?
I
You remember that?
You're the
I think I was shot down like 10 times in a row back in the day.
Thank you very much.
Oh my god.
No, it's-
No one else
Literally.
will do it.
Right, you remember?
Here I am.
Good night.
I'll see you later. So trying to do the show.
Starting back from Battle Mountain, I don't remember any other female. And I thought that was a hard one.
Well, I think that we got. I think that we have a good planning commission
Sure do.
and planners.
If chapter 16 was done, I would probably not be sitting here,
Oh.
honestly.
Yeah, I did. I think it might take a few more years, John.
We're on track.
This was the reason I got out of here in the first place.
I can string it out. Just watch what you say, Armistead. I'll string it out for you.
I'm still
All right,
lobbying
well-
for that redo of the code. Thank you, man.
Thank you for listening to that and onward and upward.
Noted.
Carol never came back in. Okay, so what's next?
Planning commission comments?
You have some comments?
No planning commission comments.
That's what
Oh,
I.
no.
I'm excited to meet Daryl in person.
Never met Joe Wygant?
He's my neighbor.
Nope, I have not. So excited to.
We might be on that wall.
Former mayor.
I might be on the-
Right there.
Earlier. 1986, 1992.
Is mayor, our mayor's 2 years?
4 years.
That's like.
Oh my god, when I go by, like,
Oh, no, I guess, yeah, because Ernie Chavez was 2 years.
Hmm.
And Earl, the first time was 2 years. Yeah, I guess it must be 2 years. And Matt was somehow 3 years.
Cause he.
He
was
resigned.
commissioner.
Oh, that's right.
With the county commission, that's right.
And what was John, 4 years?
John was 2 years.
2 years.
Well, I guess he finished out probably Matt's term. And
How
then was
long was
20,
Harold Bellum?
and then 21.
Can you see Harold Bellum?
Harold Bellum was 20 years.
20 years, that's what I thought.
So Hawk was 20, Harold was 20, Hawk was,
Hawk was 1998 to 2002, so that's 4 years, and then 2004 to 2016, which is 12 years, so 16 years total.
Who needs term limits?
we do. As I sit up here.
It's no longer than my job.
Well, I think the fact that I think you can go on for as many terms as you get appointed, but I think the 2-year term limit is a good idea.
Oh, that you keep having to get reelected.
Yeah.
Yeah, appointed.
Keep getting checked.
Gotta keep you in check.
Yes,
Make sure that they still like
yes. Sometimes it goes through even if they don't,
you.
because there's
Especially
nobody else there.
if you're listening to your neighbors.
Yeah, don't look them in the eye.
Keep your head down.
Oh.
That's what I did.
Future meetings?
Future meetings, April 24th, May 8th.
So I am not gonna be here on the 24th.
I will not be here either.
And I think I thought we
I'll probably be at the
it's
airport.
spring break. So
I will
think
not be here. I will be on Zoom.
I will be at the, I will not be here.
I mean, I can't even be on Zoom.
I can.
And I,
It's my wedding anniversary. I'm not gonna be on Zoom.
A good call.
I can be on Zoom. I'll be on the road. Sounds
Where are you going?
not sure.
Palm Springs.
I'm still be traveling. I might not have a quorum here, but
Daryl called directly. He said to me, we're gone for, he said, I forgot we're gone for a month, is how he phrased it.
Yes.
Now, I didn't get exact dates. Right. And you could text him and ask him if he finds something.
yes, I will reach out to him. But if I don't have him, then I won't have a quorum, so we might just be canceling the next meeting.
You won't mind them zooming in.
We need, I think we need everybody at this next meeting, if it's gonna be talking about the open house and survey responses, that should be a discussion with all of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would like,
Well, right now, no Scott, no Amanda, no Michael, probably no Daryl. That leaves Jeff and I, we don't have a quorum because we don't have a new member.
Right, we won't have a new member until May 1st.
Vacation.
But I will reach out to Daryl, see what, and it could be that it ended up like it did tonight. Where, you know, he tried to attend, but he just didn't, it looked like he didn't have the cell service for it. At which point he would be here for, I mean, he lasted maybe 10 minutes before his cell service cut out. So could be that we put all this stuff together, have a discussion. For us only to be here 10 minutes.
I mean, unless there's some serious business, I would prefer to have all of us present for the discussion,
definitely.
midterm forward and survey and all that.
So the next, what's the next?
May 8th.
one? May, then Mayor. No problem.
And what's the next one in 2 weeks, 14/22?
Yes.
I may be zooming on the 8th too.
I'll be in person on May
I'll be here. May, June. October.
May 8th is Wednesday, right?
Yes.
Yes.
We didn't meet on
Because our
Wednesday.
Wednesday, our meetings are always on Wednesday.
How long have you been on planning commission?
Yes, my neighbors.
Let it go, Katie John.
It's just too easy.
Michael, I think you were a bit calmer tonight. Is that because you weren't being nudged?
No, it's because I was trying to take everything in and pay attention, because when I read the packet, I didn't understand the entire process, so
I haven't even had to pinch.
I was trying to.
Tom's not here.
Focus.
Tom's not here anymore, that's what it is.
Yeah.
I'm right next to him, so it's much more fun.
Yeah. Tom.
Okay. We love him.
Congratulations.
It was just that special partnership.
One of us got called up.
Very entertaining, like Abbott and Costello.
I'm gonna have to start going to council.
Put you two together because I thought it was amusing.
Do I see him till I'm coming to council meetings, so we can hang out.
Okay, what's next?
Dermot.
Make a motion to adjourn?
Yes, may I have a
I second.
motion by Jeff, second by Michael, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It's nice to have a little one down.
Terry said that Tom lobbied pretty hard to stay on road.
Oh, really? You did?
He did.